Welcome to the Rogue L&D podcast, allowing you to meet some of the brilliant folk driving people performance and development forward in an informal and human way. My name's Tom Bailey, award-winning L&D leader and passionate maverick for all things development. Join me as I ask questions of some of the industry's most innovative and interesting people.
Well, hello. Thank you, Tom, for inviting me to do this. My name is Guy Wallace. I've been in the learning and development profession since it was called training and development. I started way back in 1979. I got a radio, TV, film degree, and I went to work for the employer that I was working for as a part-time college student. And I went off to their headquarters after I got my degree in radio, TV, film, and I joined their training services department. It was 10 people. There was somebody there named Guy already, which is quite unusual. So he was Guy 1, I was Guy 2. And I was oriented by my boss and coworker, who had been there 2 weeks longer than I was, to the work of Gary Rumler and Tom Gilbert in particular, and some others. I spent about 20 months there, and then my wife got transferred to the suburbs of Chicago, and so I left Saginaw, Michigan, and moved to Chicago land, and I joined Motorola, where I got a chance to work with Gary Rumler. He was my consultant, and the joke was that meant I carried his pencils around as we went from client site to client site. And so I got a chance to really learn from him in lots of discussions at breakfasts and dinners as we were out of town traveling to all of my client sites across North America. I did that for about 20 months, and then I went to a small consulting firm, and I was the third consultant, the founder, and my wife was already working there. And we had two other staff people that did the word processing and the office administration kinds of things. And I was asked to start a training practice area. So I started to document my methods and define the tools and the techniques that we were going to use. And I hired staff, and I used local subcontractors that I'd met when I was at Motorola. And so that began in 1982, in November 1982. And so I spent 41 years as a consultant. I served 83 clients. Over 45 Fortune 500 companies, and I worked with NASA and other government agencies as well. My work has won awards. Me and my team have won awards at AT&T and Change Healthcare, General Motors, Hewlett Packard, Imperial Oil, and Siemens Building Technologies. So I had some fairly, substantial clients, and we were able to work on really high-stakes performance, and we won some awards. At General Motors, we won the Chairman's Quality Award for the work we had done creating an 18-month program for metal fabrication supervisors. And that's a very interesting story, but I won't go into it. But so I was able to work on some things that had some attention from the top of the organizations, which brought attention to my clients, and that gave me more work with them. I've also authored over 40 books. I've produced over 5,000 blog posts. I've got a bunch of articles, over 100 articles. I've presented over 40 times at professional organizations, chapter meetings, and national and international conferences. I've been very, very lucky in my career, and I think that it's all due to the fact that I was initially oriented, no kidding, on day one to a performance-based approach to instruction or training or learning. And I was just darn lucky to be in that position and to have the opportunities that I've had, and just a very lucky guy, if you will.
So you're there in 1979. You've got your kipper tie, you've got your flares, you're ready to go. What made you choose to leave journalism and I guess that study that you'd had, and then move into something like performance?
So I was a journalist in the United States Navy, and before and after the Navy, I was in college at the University of Kansas and started off in architecture. And then because I couldn't really handle the math requirements, I switched over to journalism and radio, TV, film. And I thought, oh, that'd be creative. And I think that's what I wanted to do in architecture, is be creative. And I got out of the Navy and I decided to go and continue pursuing that radio, TV, film degree. And I thought I wanted to get into educational TV, but that wasn't offered. And I was told, oh, you have to go to this other school in the state of Kansas. And I thought, well, I'm not doing that. And so I was very lucky. I had worked for 3 managers at a company called Wicks Lumber. So it was a lumber center. They had 183 lumber centers across North America. And my third manager, went off to this annual managers meeting, and they were all told that, oh, they're gonna replace the media that they were using for training of the staff at these 183 lumber centers. They were going to go from 35 millimeter slides with audio tracks to video. So video was going to save the day. And so not only did my current manager go to the head of HR, the HR vice president, and tell him that he had to hire me, my 2 previous managers had told him the same thing. And he related this to me in my second round of interviews. I went up to go interview and met the guy that was in charge of the new video portion of the department. He and I did not get along. He asked me, what would I do if I disagreed with him? And I told him that I would tell him that I would do what he was asking, but I would share my disagreement with him. And I think that was a little too strong for him. And the vice president of HR told me this. And he said, but I want you to come work for me. So our director is not here this week, so I want you to come back next week. It's a long flight from the middle of the United States to Saginaw, Michigan. But I came back the next week, met the director. He liked me. He had been like me. He'd come out from one of the stores into the headquarters operations, and I was going to have a job like he had back in the day. And he said, well, I've got a new manager that I want you to work for, but she's not on board yet. So I want you to come back next week and meet with her and interview with her, and we'll see. And the HR vice president told me, no matter what happens, you're going to come and work for me, regardless. So, take it easy. And so I came back that next week and I met this new manager, and she had been brought in because the guy in the video department was the brother-in-law of this guy named Gary Rumler. I didn't know who this was. She had worked at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Detroit, Michigan for Gary Rumler's brother. And so she came on board and she brought one of her coworkers as an employee on her new staff, and I was going to take the 3rd position. So I was just lucky in getting this exposure to use my radio and TV film background, because I was going to be producing video scripts for the video production department to shoot and produce. And I was going to create not only the video scripts, because it was video-based training, I was going to create all the ancillary materials that went along with that so that the store managers or assistant managers could conduct the training sessions in their, standard early Saturday morning meeting before the store opened. That's how they all operated. And so I was just very lucky that I was able to I have some writing talent, maybe not very much, but I was able to use all of that. And I started writing articles for the company newsletter. And they asked me to do that. And so I got a chance to apply certain aspects of what I learned in journalism courses in the United States Navy and at college in this new job. And it was just all very exciting. But the thing that really got to me was this performance orientation, because it just made so much sense. I had been through training in the Navy. I'd had my educational courses in college and high school before that. But this was very different. This was very hands-on. You have to do these 7 steps, and here's how you think about it as you're doing it. And I thought, well, this is like some of the stuff that I had to use in the Navy to do preventive maintenance. They were little laminated cards. It said, step 1, do this, step 2, 3, 4, and it got you through the whole thing. And you didn't need any training. You just followed this. What I learned was job aids. However, back in 1979, on day one, I was given three things. And one of them was this newsletter article from 1970 by this guy, Gary Rumler, and his partner, Tom Gilbert. And it was entitled Guidance, The Short Way Home. And guidance was already known 9 years later better as job aids. And nowadays we know it as performance support, or, various names for the same kind of a concept. And I was told that that's what we were going to do. We were going to do job aids. We weren't going to do training because, you can't ask people to impossibly memorize all the stuff in training. You can just give them job aids, and then they can use that on the job in order to be able to perform. Well, that made great sense to me. Now, our clients at Wicks Lumber hated it. They were expecting traditional training. They didn't want this job aids thing. I didn't know what that was. And so we did sneaky trick 47, which was embed job aids into the training. We made our clients happy because they got training. We made the learners, who are really performers, we made them happy because we gave them the guidance, the job aids that they needed in order to do certain tasks. Because let's face it, you're not going to take a course on conducting the annual inventory and memorize it and remember it 11 months later in order to conduct the annual inventory. So giving people job aids to do things like, and of course, if you use a job aid often enough, 2 days, 3 days later, you don't need it anymore. You memorized it and you can perform. But we gave them that guidance that they could call upon when needed. And I was just, very excited about all of that. That was just, wonderful. So I found a profession that I liked. I was able to be fairly good at it, and it was just the start. So I just had this lucky start. But the second thing I was given was this book by Bob Mager and Peter Pipe called "Analyzing Performance Problems," or "They Really Oughta Wanna." And this was about help me see that performance problems or opportunities, two sides of the same coin, are not always rooted in a deficiency of knowledge and skills. And so I was taught that it was just as important to avoid doing training or learning when it wasn't sufficient or necessary, and to look at all the variables in the performance situation to determine, where are the gaps? What's causing the gap in performance? What is it? What variable? Is it knowledge and skills, or is it something else? And so that was eye-opening, because that made great sense to me, because I'd spent 3 years in the United States Navy, and anybody who's worked for a government bureaucracy knows how much nonsense happens inside one of those babies. And but anyway, so that was the second thing. The third thing I was given was a book by Tom Gilbert, who was one of the co-authors of that first reference, the guidance. And his book was 1978 book, Human Competence. And in that, he talked about the cult of behaviors, where the focus back in the 70s and 60s before that was on behaviors, but it wasn't within the context of performance, because behaviors sometimes need to vary depending on, what's the situational context. And so too often people were teaching people on behaviors as if that's the one and only way to do things. And they weren't varying their behaviors based on the conditions, the context that they were facing. And so that he was bemoaning the cult of behaviors, because too often people didn't understand what he called the accomplishments, what Rumler called the outputs that were to be produced, were to be achieved. And so, that's been true. People focus on knowledge or skills nowadays. That's the big thing. Or behaviors, and then competencies in the decades before, without understanding, what's the application of that. So too often it gets genericized into something that's more education, or even worse, communications, and it's not really training, where we're teaching people not only that content, that communications or educational content, but we're teaching them how to apply it, which is then the shift into training. But good training has sufficient practice with feedback so that Guy, the learner, can really hone that capability, that competence. And so those three things I was given on the first day. So I read the article the first day. I read the book the first night. I was my life hadn't caught up to me yet. None of my possessions. I was living at a motel. And so I started to read the Human Competence book, and those things and those people have been significant contributors to my success. Sorry for such a long answer.
No, it's good. You may. I'm not going to use the word triggered because that seems to be like some current word. But you just reminded me of one of your recent posts, which is where you talk about Weiner, because you talked about.
Whoa, Ina. What's old is new again.
Yeah, exactly.
But the people in 1979 and 1980, the thought leaders, they were complaining about this then.
Well, but this is it, because there aren't really any new ideas, right? We're just polishing up other ideas or ideas that have already been around. And video learning is a great one, because that I'm pretty sure that had a little hiatus in the 90s where it became really popular. I think they just made them shorter. But then also skills-based. Now, that is a personal pain point of mine.
So there is some logic into it all, though. The people need knowledge, they need skills, they need to learn these behaviors.
Nothing wrong with it, but it's not like a new thing. It's not like we've got, oh crap, skills. Oh, no one ever thought about that. Anyway.
Yeah, one of the awards that I won, internal award at what's now Siemens Building Technologies, which was MCC Powers, air conditioning and heating and ventilation systems, and that they were contractors all across North America, and we helped them do what they had a big, huge program and initiative that they called time to performance. In other words, reducing the time to performance competence. And my organization helped them. They were one of my clients going back in 1983, one of my first clients as a consultant. And we have this performance orientation. So we figure out, what are the outputs produced? What are the tasks performed? Who's doing what? What are the various roles and responsibilities? Okay, that's ideal performance. Now, what are the current state gaps? Where are you not getting outputs that meet those measures and standards, if they have such? And okay, so now we've got a clear picture of the ideal performance and the current state gaps, because the gaps are really important, because we have to teach people. Sometimes there's barriers to performance, but some master performers have already figured out how to avoid barriers in the first place and what to do about them if they were unavoidable in the second place. And so that may not be the first thing you focus on when you're training somebody, when you're helping them learn and master their job. But eventually they've got to figure that out. So if you say, hey, it's as easy as 1, 2, 3, 4, see how easy that, okay, well, there's a barrier there in between 2 and 3, and there's several of them. And so here's what you do if you are confronted by them. And then once you have that performance documented, articulated, captured in some way, you can begin to systematically derive what are the enabling knowledge and skills. So what do you got to know so that you can perform? And then you can look at, what have we already got existing in inventory so we don't have to recreate things that we've already gotten? Can we use that stuff as is, or do we have to modify it and then it'll be fine for our needs? So we can salvage the investments of the past. That became really critical to me. And so back to the Woina thing, well, there's so many things that are old that have been given new names, or they've been shinied up a little bit.
Yep.
But in my experience, the only thing that's really changed, there's some other changes, but most of it is the digital technology that we use to conduct our work, to administrate our work, and to deploy our work. But the basics, the blocking and tackling, as we say, based on American football, is that what you've got to do to understand the performance requirements of your learners, well, that's been true since the 60s, and people have been writing about it and sharing that since the early 1960s, no kidding. And so my many mentors would complain about the fact that, why is it that we don't seem to, that got no traction? And now it's come along here and it's got a new name, and what's missing. So it's okay that things change and the name changes, and that's not my problem. It's that what gets lost is the lessons learned in the past when it was the original name or a different name, and under what conditions does that work, and under what conditions does that not work. And so that's what's lost, is all that, the situational analyses that says, here's where this is just fine, you can use this, or if you're going to do that in this other kind of a context, you're going to have to adapt it, you're going to have to include some other things perhaps. And so all of that gets lost because some marketing group, most likely, that's who I like to blame, they've decided to put a new spin on this, new and improved, and it's got a new name, so you don't even know it was something from the past. But so it's woe eine. What's old is new again. And, I feel like an old guy who's yelling, get off my lawn. But this is, but so I think it's, what I've told people is that it's okay. Learn the current language, learn the new processes and all of that, master that where in whatever context you're working in. And at some point, but know that this is probably not new, and there's probably lessons from the past, and at some point you can go learn about those things, and that'll help you improve your own practice.
Yep.
Because these things are not new, despite the marketing spin that's put on these things nowadays.
Absolutely. Guy, it might shock you to learn this, but I'm actually younger than you, and what I really genuinely love about this conversation that I'm having with you, and I appreciate that this is all not part of the questions that I'm actually going to ask you, but you're referencing the 70s, the 80s, the 60s even. And it's so interesting because I can't remember the last time I had a conversation with someone who said, hey, in 1989, this is what happened. Because I never have that. To be fair, most people I talk to are born in 1990 or 2000. Yeah. But it's still, I never have those conversations, or I get to have those conversations. And I agree with you. As a learning industry, it is very ironic that we're so bad at learning lessons. It's like collective amnesia as an industry.
So when people have complained about this in the past, like you go to a conference and it's the same stuff every year. Well, that's because we have this tremendous churn in the ranks, and we have all sorts of people that come in, they stay for a year or two or three or four, and then they're gone off to doing something else. And so we have this constant need to address new people and give them some of the basics. And of course, then people who attended that session, last year or 2 years ago go, hey, it's the same darn stuff. So people start changing it up a little bit, giving it new names and things like that. And, it's just the nature of the beast, I guess. But I'm 72 years old. I got a late start in the profession because I had run out of money in college and got drafted because I had left college and lost my student deferment. The Vietnam War was still going on. And once I got done with my 3 years in the Navy, I went back to school. So I started, in the learning and development profession, if you will, when I was 27 years old. So
there aren't many people who start out in L&D. We all come from different places, right? Which is part of the beauty of this. You have just prompted me of another thing that is very ironic about our industry. We go at lengths to talk about performance and how human-centered design we use it. But then you get a conference and we go back to teaching. There's one person at the front. This is an L&D conference. Why do we do that? Why do we have conferences where it's traditional teach? And I remember nothing from it.
I think we're social animals, and we need to meet with like-minded people and hear from them, learn from them, chat with them, establish our network. And the price that we pay is that we have to go and listen to conference speakers, in the big hall or often in some little room. And there's things to be learned there because, but so I think that, it's terrible that we, don't practice what we preach. E-learning is fine for everybody else, but we want to go to the conference and learn from, in face to face in large groups where there's large lecture halls, basically. So that can take you so far. You can learn some things in a large lecture environment, if you will. But what's missing then is a demonstration of that. What does that look like when you're doing that? Is that is the room on fire, or is it space?
Exactly.
And then the practice with feedback so that I can actually, so that's what's missing from conference experiences. That's what's missing from educational experiences. That's what good training, and even though, there's a lot of people say, hey, training, you train dogs. And my retort to that is always tell that to the U.S. Marines.
Well, but training dogs
we train the U.S. Marines here because this is serious stuff, and we need to know that they know how to do what we ask them to do when we send them off to do it. This is not like what we told them.
Absolutely. Yeah, you drill it. You drill that. But training dogs is great. I wish more people train dogs as I listen to the chorus of barking dogs out in my garden. I mean, seriously, what's wrong with training? Training dogs is great, and it works.
Yeah, and training people works as well, because I went through lots of training in the United States Navy, in boot camp and such. And, there were things that I never, ever used, but I remember them because they were beat into me practically by the boot camp instructors or facilitators or...
Yes. Guy, I want to move really quick because there's really good questions I want to ask you, but I need to get through literally the second question. So I think I know what the answer to this is, but if you can do it, I think it's basically what is your passion point? And I think it's going to be around performance because you've mentioned it a lot, and for good reason.
So in my retirement here now, I'm really focused on helping learning and development organizations, leaders, and practitioners become more performance-based. So what are the philosophies and processes and practices that one might adopt or adapt into their own practice that's appropriate for their context? And that's really what I'm all about nowadays.
Beautiful. Love it. And look, you've touched on this already, and I was picking up earlier on NASA and GM and all these amazing businesses, which, I mean, that in itself could be about 20 books just writing about experiences in these corporate environments, and the I guess great catalogues of different people that you were training in different things and driving performance in completely different skill sets, which would be fascinating. But what's the best L&D that you've ever seen, and what made it so good?
All right, so I've given that some thought, and it was my 5 months at DINFOS, which is the Defense Information School. It was part of the Department of Defense of the U.S. military. It was an all-service school, so there were Marines and sailors and people from the Air Force and Army and Coast Guard and some 3-letter organizations that they would joke if we told you what that was, we would have to kill you. But it was for information officers and their staff, and I was enlisted in the Navy, and so I went and took and graduated from a print journalism course and a broadcast journalism course, and it was hands-on. We didn't spend a lot of time in lectures or seeing somebody else do it. We were just thrown in there and given feedback. If you've ever seen the movie Good Morning Vietnam with Robin Williams, and the person that he worked for, the mean SOB that he worked for, well, I had several of those in this course, in these courses, and they really were there to hone your capabilities. So I learned radio broadcasting and television broadcasting, and I learned how to do what would be a ship's newspaper or a Navy base's newspaper, and how to do the layup, do the photojournalism, write articles, write headlines, all of that kind of stuff. And it was really hands-on. And in an amazing short amount of time, I really developed some critical skill sets. And then I went off to my ship, and my job was different than most of the people that I had been in this DINFOS training, but I was able to take what I had learned and apply it to that particular context with my job. So it was a huge experience. And so it's funny that I worked with somebody at Motorola, and 30 years after we had worked together at Motorola, I found out that he had been in that same program. And we spent an afternoon reminiscing about it and how hands-on it was and how skilled we became so quickly. But anyway, so that was the best thing. And I think that's one of the things I took into the learning and development profession way after the Navy is that, that hands-on, getting in there with authentic practice. You're not practicing somebody else's job. You're practicing something that's your job explicitly or close enough that you'll be able to go back out to the job and apply what you've learned because you've really honed a skill here. You've been given that feedback, that reinforcing feedback and that corrective feedback that really shaped your capabilities.
I mean, literally doing the job is the best way to learn, right? So
exactly. I mean, if it's not scalable,
Yeah.
We can't have one-on-one coaching for everybody that's on the production line. So we send them off to some room and teach them some stuff. And what gets lost then is reality.
Yes. Yeah. Now, I imagine with your years of knowledge of semaphore and other things, what's your favorite hand gesture?
All right. So I've got two things I want to talk about here. So the first one is the salute. And I would tell clients when they would make a request, I would say, well, I'm saluting you here and I, demonstratively saluting here. And so I'd say, I will do what you're asking me to do, but I would not do it if it were me. So let me get out of my way and let me get on with it. Some clients, of course, like that. Just go do what I just told you to do. Other clients would say, well, hold on there a minute. What do you mean you wouldn't do that? And if I built a trusting relationship with them or I had a reputation that preceded me because I got internal references in some of these companies here, and so you came highly recommended, so they would maybe listen to me and I would have a shot at having them look at their situation a little bit differently and talk about what they were asking me to do and whether or not that was going to be successful. So sometimes it was a check the box exercise, so they need to get something done and get on with, the rest of their job. But other times they were really trying to make an improvement or deal with a situation and turn it around. And so I got a lot. So this, saluting but the other gesture that I wanted to talk about was a head nod. So I spent my career doing what I call a facilitated group process, where I'd bring in master performers, other subject matter experts, supervisors, and sometimes newer performers into analysis team meetings or design team meetings. And I had this rule. I'm going to ask a bunch of questions. I own the process. You own the data. I've got the questions. You're going to give me the answer. So I'm going to ask this question. The first person that answers me, I'm not going to stand there with my pen and, because that sends a signal that maybe that wasn't right. So, and I would tell the groups this, so I don't want to do that. So you say something, I'm going to write it down. And then I'm going to turn back to the group and I'm going to do face polling. I'm going to look into each and every one of your faces to see if you concur or not with what I just captured. And you can help me out by nodding up and down if you agree, or nodding sideways if you don't agree. And if you're not sure, nod your head diagonally. And that would get a laugh and it would loosen up the group. But I needed them to understand that I have a process here. It's a proven process. I don't have the data. I would tell Bill, you could all lie to me. You could agree at breakfast. Hey, let's just take Guy on this wild ride and lie to him and tell him all these, nonsense things. And he'll write it down and believe it, because what does he know? He didn't do this job for a living. And so that was my situation. I was a facilitator tapping into the expertise and the knowledge of a group. And I would even have to encourage people to disagree with each other, but do it in a gentle manner. So you didn't say, Guy, you stupid idiot. That's not right. So what, and I would tell people when Joe says, Guy, you stupid idiot, that's not right. What he's really trying to say is, Guy, I think we need to look at this from another perspective. And the group would laugh and all that stuff. So I needed to keep the group loose so that they'd be willing to contribute what they knew. And even if it was different from the person next to them, because let's face it, only rote performance is the same each and every time. So all these people came from different performance contexts, different clients, different facilities or whatever, and they needed to get the job done. So they were dealing with all these situational variables in the performance context. And one of the things that I learned was that sometimes there's more than one way to get something done. And they're both equally good, other than if they were in the wrong situation. So those were my gestures. So the salute, and then the whole head nodding thing, which always became a joke, and people would answer each other with the diagonal because I don't know what the heck you're talking about, Guy.
It's so good. It's such a little window into your facilitation technique, because it's already you get the warmth and the fun of, you know, silly nodding. And also, just a shout out to disagreement. It's great to have some disagreement, and we run away from it so often. In these conferences that I derided earlier, I'd love to have more debates rather than panels. With so many panels where everyone agrees with everyone about everything, how about a friendly debate where we go, actually, you know, I'll take on NPS. I'll say that I love it, even though I don't. Just to spark some discussion.
So I know that you've already done one of these podcasts with David James, who invited me to come on to one of his podcasts with Nick Shackleton-Jones.
Oh, yes.
And to have a disagreement.
Yes.
So this is what they thought they were going to get from us. But my take on that is that, you know, what Nick talks about, and this is true of many, many people, we all talk about this a little bit differently, or sometimes a lot differently. But most of the time, we're really talking about the same things. We just use different language, different imagery. As we describe things, we've fragmented it, segmented it differently. So, you know, you carve up the elephant into 5 chunks. I cover it into 7. When you add it all back up together, it's the elephant, you know. So that's one of the things that new people coming into the field need to figure out. That a lot of this is the same, they're just using different language. Is it the or the? You know, and so that just throws people. It looks like the same thing, but it sounds different. And so that's one of the things that people have to learn to do, is to demystify their sources to see, you know, what is the same. So Nick might talk about something in one way, and I talk about it a little bit differently. And my perspective is, you know, it's pretty much the same. I read his book. I told him later on, I said, you know, it took me half the book to figure out what you meant by green trainers. Now, those are running shoes in America. But, you know, he mentioned it several times in his book, and I'm thinking, you know, what is a green trainer? Is that a newbie who's really now the facilitator in some training program? You know, what's a green trainer? Anyway, but that's just, you know, people have to get used to that, and it's just the nature of the beast. We learn from others who give us language and labels, and we either adopt them or adapt them, and now, you know, so that's just kind of messy. The language has always been messy.
It has. I must admit, if I ever watch anything on YouTube that is more street American, like, I don't know, Midwest or wherever, I genuinely have no idea what 18-year-olds are saying. Like, the words that I can pick up the odd word, but it's like, I don't know, it's like pidgin English. I don't know what you're saying. I would really struggle. I'd be like, I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're talking about. Anyway, I must move on. What is one thing, now this is a very divisive question, so feel free to lay into me, but what is one thing that you didn't learn?
Yeah, so one thing I didn't learn formally, and I learned informally, this goes way back in the day to the early 1960s, when I was 10 and 11 years old, and I had a newspaper route, and I delivered 68 newspapers 7 days a week. And my mother got me a new bicycle for this. She had signed me up for this. You know, this wasn't my idea. And I had to put on the tall handlebars, the big handlebars, you know, and because the newspaper bag fit on that better than the lower standard handlebars. So I had to change the handlebars out, and I didn't know how to do that, but I did it. And I had to put lights on because sometimes it was early mornings on Sundays and late at night in the evenings and in the dark. And so I had to have lights on my bike. And I had to put a carrier on the back over the back tire for the bag that fit over the back, because the 68 newspapers takes up a lot of room, especially on Sundays. And but I had to learn all of that myself. So I was what we would call a shade tree mechanic as a kid, working on my bicycle to keep it in shape. So the chain would break or something would happen. You'd have to know how to fix that thing to finish the job and get all those newspapers delivered on time. Because if I didn't have that Sunday newspaper at everybody's house by 7 a.m., the office got called and they would send somebody out in the car to try to figure out what the heck was my problem.
I remember when I was growing up, a little after you, in the 80s, let's say, and I got a paper round. It was my first job, and it paid worst paying job ever, obviously. But I remember in the 80s, I think it must have been the 80s. In the 80s, it was always a rage. You'd see or think like Michael J. Fox delivering newspapers in Back to the Future or something. I might have made that up. But there was that kind of idea that in America, you just sling the newspaper onto the lawn, right? Whereas I could never do that. I had to put it in every single letterbox, every front. Was it like that? Were you just chucking it?
Yeah. So I rode there were lawns that I could ride across and it was okay. And there were other lawns I couldn't. So I had to go up the driveway and back down. And then, it was the longer route. But some people allowed me to deliver the newspaper and toss it onto their stoop, their front door, or I had to stop, get off my bike and put it inside some screen door or something. And so it was a variance. And so what I was told by the person who trained me by taking my route and say, that's it. Any questions, kid? And of course I didn't have many. But was when I made my collections on Friday and trying to collect my 35 cents, because I think 8 cents of that was mine. And I made $8.14 a week, $8.14 a week. And which was a lot of money back in those days. So I would ask people, was that okay? Did they have any requirements? Can I ride across your lawn? Yes or no. And I think that helped me establish a relationship with these people. I always thought it helped me increase the tip that I got because, so the richest people that I delivered the newspaper never tipped me except at Christmas. And the poorest people, the mother with 3 children, the single mother with 3 children, she gave me a dime or 15 cents every week. And my mother said, well, that's probably because she works for tips and she gets it. So, but it's not quite the just fling it and whatever.
Well, let me tell you, when I delivered the free paper, The Informer, in Walton-on-Thames, Surrey, UK, I never got tipped in any of the years. No tips at all. Just not the culture. Just very, very low pay. Anyway.
At Christmas time, I made $120 in tips from 68 people. That was huge.
That's a long time ago. That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money, and for an 11-year-old kid, that was significant.
You could have hired a bike mechanic. You could have made it. Okay. You've probably covered this, but let's do it again. Maybe you haven't actually. What's your proudest moment in the industry?
All right, so I had a client back in 1986, AT&T Network Systems, and this was the old Western Electric part of AT&T, the manufacturing, where they made all the stuff that created the telephone system. And I was working with the product management group. They had been told by McKinsey that they didn't really have a product management group, and this was just after the monopoly of AT&T was ended by the U.S. Justice Department, so now they were going to have to compete. The good news was nobody knew how to compete with them, and so they had a window of 2-3 years before they would actually have competitors. But they were told, you don't have product managers, you have product expediters in the factory trying to hurry things along. And so you needed to professionalize this group. Well, I won the project, my company won the project, and so my 2 business partners and myself did the analysis for what does a product manager do? And there were 800 people in this organization across 4 business sectors, soon to be 5 business sectors with 1,100 people. And everybody's job was different. And I had people that were 2-3 years into the jobs asking me, Did what I tell you, is that what everybody else is telling you? Because when I look around the cube farm here and what everybody else is doing, I'm not doing any of that. I don't know if my boss knows what I'm supposed to be doing, whether they're a good boss or not. It's like everybody's job is different here. That really struck me. But anyway, so I developed a curriculum architecture with, that's basically creates learning paths, but we had this big giant marketing poster and said, here's all the courses in a suggested sequence. And you would go through a planning exercise and pull down the things that you really needed for your job and then sequence them so that it was timely for you and your boss and your part of the business. And the Keystone course was at the end of the first phase of modular curricula, if you will. And it was an 8-day course. And I created this 8-day course, and it had 5 rounds of simulation that matched the life cycle stages or phases that the company was using. And there were 20 people in each class and divided into 2 groups of 10. And so you and a partner would be the product managers running a product team meeting, and there'd be 2 people representing the labs, Bell Labs, and 2 people representing manufacturing, and 2 people representing sales, and 2 people representing services and the installation groups. And you would run a team meeting, and they would have data packs and information, and you would have to figure out, so what are you going to be able to, how many are you going to be able to sell next year at this price or that price? And Bell Labs would say, oh, we're going to put these feature sets in there. And the manufacturing says, well, that means our costs are going to go up. And that means your margin is going to go down unless you raise the price. And then sales would complain, well, you can't raise the price on me. I can't sell as many now. And service would go, how do we learn how to install this newfangled stuff? So you as a participant would go through 25 product team meetings. You would sit in every chair, so you would begin to learn what are the issues in this phase versus that phase of the life cycle. Introducing a new product and ramping it up is different than growth and maturity or when you're in decline and you're going to discontinue the product. And so this was an 8-day course, and 60% of it was hands-on exercises. Well, I delivered this course 31 times for my client. It's the only course I ever delivered because I don't, do that. But they encouraged me to do that by promising me more business, so I did it. And this was in 87. I created it, and we pilot tested it at the end of the year. And then a year and a half later, they asked me to take this to the Netherlands, to their international operations in Europe. And so I went over there. I met with the clients. They go, 8 days? Come on, you got to be kidding. And but they agreed that we could pilot test it. And so I went back and I did the 8-day delivery. And then the managers, the product management managers, assembled everybody that had gone through the 8-day course, and myself and my client who was there trying to make sure that they didn't destroy what we were doing. And the goal of the meeting was, how do we reduce this to 5 or 3 days? Well, all of the students, there was a screaming match, and people were screaming at their bosses or somebody else's bosses saying, we don't want you to do that. We really learned how to do the job, how to think about it, how to structure it, how to run these meetings with all these other functions that we have no control over, yet we're responsible for what we collectively do. And so the managers then reluctantly agreed, oh, okay, you can do the 8-day course. We hate it, but we'll let you do it. And so I delivered it 5 more times. And I was very proud of listening to the participants who had just gone through this. And I had asked that in the pilot test that we have people with a lot of experience, half the class, 10 people with lots of experience, people who have been in the business, 5, 10, 20 years doing this job. And then other people who were really brand new because they represented the target audience. And I said, I need to see if we can have people learn things. And I can do that with the target audience members, but with the old guard, I can't, they can't learn anything. Theoretically, they know it already. Now, is what we're teaching accurate, complete, and appropriate? Well, the new people can't tell me any of that, but the old people can. So I needed both groups. And so I was successful at getting the right participants in this pilot session. And when both groups insisted to their management that they not touch this, they leave it alone. We want exactly the same thing that's being delivered back in the States. And I don't. That was we won an award at NSPI, which is now ISPI, for this project because the CFO organization had calculated that we had a 487% return on investment.
Wow.
And I don't know how CFO organizations calculate that and how they really did it, but they sanctioned our number that we used in our submission for this award.
Phenomenal.
And so it was just very impactful, and I was so proud of the fact that these people were going to get into screaming matches with their bosses, with their manager's boss, and stand firm on, because it was all about the practice with feedback, and there was so much of that. You really honed the skill. It wasn't just tell them and maybe show them, or just tell them and they'll figure it out. It was really, okay, now let's go apply what we just heard about.
It was also them experiencing firsthand a 360 perspective, to be in the other shoes, right?
Exactly. I mean, that was really critical because people could anticipate what the issues of the sales organ were going to be in our next meeting. And we could listen to, what the people at Bell Labs were doing. And the history of the company was that Bell Labs created new stuff. And it went into the product whether anybody liked it or not, because that's what they saw their job to be. And manufacturing, hey, live with it, figure it out. And the world was changing. They were going to have to be competitive and be profitable. And so the product management organization's job was to tell the people at Bell Labs, Bell Labs is a big deal, to tell them, no, we're not going to do that. Sorry. Manufacturing, they send you that stuff, put it in a drawer, because you're not putting that feature set into this product because you're going to jack up the price too much when we have competitors who are lowering their price and we're raising up. That doesn't work. And so the sales organization would be, but my customers want that newfangled stuff because they're hearing about it. And, so it was all this tension, and you had to learn how to manage, plan a meeting, conduct a meeting, and deal with the real world issues that you would really confront. And so sitting in everybody else's chair and representing them in these role play meetings, if you will, but anyway, so it was a great experience. It was the first major simulation that I got to build, and see its success, and see how the learners, they were scared to death about, I'm going to have to run a meeting. But some people would tell me afterwards, I didn't think I could do it, but you've proven to me that I can. So I have now initial preliminary competence and the confidence to go back out there. And so if I can extend this story a little bit. So my client's boss invited me to dinner when I was in town in New Jersey out of Chicago. And so he took me to dinner. He said, I got to tell you this story here. One of my peers in one of the business units told me about this. He and his boss went with one of your trainees from the pilot session in '87, went to a product team meeting, and it was going to be tense. And what this woman product manager did, the Bell Labs people said, you got to do this for these reasons here. And we got this stack of documents, and they went and took them and set them on her desk right in front of her in this meeting. And she continued to talk, and she picked up the pile of stuff and went back over there and took it and put it back on their desk and said, that's why we have you on the payroll, to do those kinds of things here. My job is to decide and help us as a group decide what we're really going to do. So when you produce things like that, don't push them on me here. I'm glad you did your homework and you were prepared for this, but we've got to make some business decisions about what's feasible from a profitability standpoint, from a technology evolution standpoint. And so her boss and her boss's boss were simply blown away. And the kicker on the story was that she went to this meeting, they all got off the airplane, and her boss and her boss's boss told her, you're going to run this meeting, not us. And she was freaking out and how am I going to do? She said, wait a minute. I just went through this training session. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do this. And she did it all. And that word came back. And so that was one of the reasons that the course was so popular, because of the word of mouth of the participants. And this young woman, product manager, well, her daddy was the person who owned the service organization for AT&T Network Systems. And so even he heard about it, and he started sending his people to this course because they needed to know, what are these product managers learning, and how are they screwing us, and how can we, defend ourselves? And they looked at it, well, this was really a win-win collaborative kind of a process that they were learning. And it was, how do we collectively win, not just any one organization? We can't have sales win and everybody else lose. That's no good. Unless that was a business decision that sales is going to win this one and the rest of us are going to take the hit. And that's for the good of the company.
Yeah, I mean, you can't beat learner feedback just for the lovely feeling it gives you, but also to know that you've made a difference is so strong. It reminds me of negotiation training nowadays, where they talk about a win-win, right? So these very smart, go back to the clever marketing organizations, these very smart people like the Gap Partnership and others, there are many, have now figured out, instead of just picking a side, a retailer or a supplier or whatever, we'll pick both sides and we'll talk about everybody winning and everyone operating at it's the same methodology. It's just
it is, and so before I did that as a consultant, I worked at Motorola, where I got a chance to work with Neil Rackham of spin selling fame. And not only did they have spin selling, which is really a win-win approach to selling, because you don't want to sell things that people don't need. So part of spin is, what's their situation, what's their problems and opportunities, what's the implication, is this a big deal, a little deal, insignificant or really significant, and what's the needs payoff. So if I can solve your $10 million problem for $250,000, are you interested? Well, yeah. So that you spin them, which is a Socratic process. But Hathaway also had a win-win negotiations program, and I was assigned the job of bringing that in to Motorola for purchasing agents, for salespeople, and for people who negotiated government contracts for big black box deals where we sold 2 of them for $5 million. And so the whole notion of win-win, and really the simulation that I built for AT&T Network Systems was based on what I had learned in spin selling and win-win negotiations and the simulation design concepts and elements that I learned from Hathaway. So this whole collaborative, let's create a win-win for everybody, suppliers, us, customers, all the various stakeholders, that was critical in my development, to have that perspective of that there's more stakeholders than just the downstream customer. We have regulators, we have shareholders, we have suppliers, we have employees, we have the communities we operate in. And so how do we look at all of their needs and issues and constraints and do the best that we can in meeting what everybody needs? And when people have to take the hit and they don't win, they in fact lose, they need to be able to see that it's for the common good. You take the hit, we all win. And it just looks bad on your numbers. And, we have to have a way to explain it to your chain of command here as to why your numbers look bad. But we all win because you took the hit. You were willing to do that because you saw how that worked.
So, look, from the dizzying heights of your proudest moment, let's talk about your worst experience in L&D. You've got to have a good story, surely.
Oh, yeah. I was working at Motorola, and my clients were the manufacturing, materials, and purchasing organizations, and I was asked to create a course using it was the corporate subject matter expert, that was on his business card, for purchasing. Well, so I had tried to convince them to let me go out and do, some research out in the field and talk to other purchasing agents and all. Oh, no, the Global Purchasing Council decided. The Global Purchasing Council decided that, no, just work with this guy here and he'll get such on. So I did it. We created the course. He delivered it. It was a total bomb. The feedback was terrible. We got ripped to shreds. At the next Global Purchasing Council meeting, I was there and I said, I've got the data from the feedback, and they'd already heard. They knew it was a terrible bomb. And they ripped into the corporate subject matter expert, because he was the face of the course, because he was standing up and, all I did was pretty up the slides or whatever they thought. And so they were ripping into him, and I stood up and I said, no, the fault for this is me. It's on me. And they argued, no, it's not, and they wanted to argue, and I kept on arguing with them. No, it's me. So I took all the blame and channeled it to me. And I said, and I'll take the hit on this thing here, but let's quit talking about who to blame. Let's figure out how we're going to fix this. And the clients kind of sat back, and there were a number of them in the room, and they sat back, and once they realized that I was on their side and trying to make this impactful to new purchasing agents so they could survive, reducing turnover, et cetera, and mistakes, so that was a huge win for me by shifting that over. And I said, I asked for you at the very beginning. So I turned this around and then, beat him up with this. I said, I asked you originally to let me talk to real purchasing agents and their supervisors out in the facilities. There were 30 some facilities. I said, you need to pick which ones I need to go to and all of that. And let me talk to them. And I'm going to build a model of performance for what this job is. And then we're going to develop training to train people on how to do that, rather than just rely on some corporate. So one of the things I found out in that meeting was that the corporate SME had been 7 years out of the field and up at headquarters. And back in the day, the joke was, oh, you're from headquarters, you're here to help. You can help us best by leaving right now. And nobody wants help from headquarters. And the guy was 7 years out of the field. So everything that he knew was 7 years out of date, and the world was changing. There was MRP and MRP2, which later became ERP systems, and computers were coming in, and how to reduce your number of parts in materials. There was a whole bunch of things going on at Motorola at the time to reduce costs and to compete with their Japanese competitors in particular. But anyway, so that was the thing. It was a total bomb. And I had somehow learned that, rather than let this go on and on where somebody else is getting beat up, just stand up and take the bullets and let's get on with it. And that won a lot of respect for me from those people. And they started to listen to me when I had something to say. And the session that we delivered, the second pilot, if you will, was a huge success because we were focused on the performance of people and not just a whole bunch of topics, which is what the first course had been.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love it. But always good to take responsibility. I mean, I feel like in HR, a lot of people shirk responsibility. They try and, Teflon shoulders, they kind of pass it on to somebody else.
It depends on the culture, so some cultures are very punishing, and people, we should share our mistakes, and that's really to help other people avoid them in the future. But if your organization is going to beat you up for sharing your mistakes, you ain't going to do it.
Well, this is the thing. I still think in this day and age, and maybe it's because where I am geographically, but failure really is not an option. We talk about it still, but it's such an obstacle for learning. If you can't admit failure and learn from it fast, or just acknowledge it, it's really hard, really hard. You're missing most of the picture. Anyway.
Yeah, because there's lessons to be learned in failures, and so there's insights to be gained. And, what works in one context may not work in another, and that's part of, if we share that, we'll help other people avoid those things, and it'll be all to the good.
Absolutely. You've got to have a good celebrity story. Some time in which you met a celebrity or had some interaction with someone.
I have very few, but this one is kind of funny. So my client, MCC Powers, which is now Siemens Building Technologies, held their annual managers meeting in the suburbs of Chicago. And my clients in the training organization asked me to come to this management meeting because they were going to have side meetings where they were going to meet with people who were requesting training, and they wanted me to be in the room to help understand, the context, what's going on, what was at the root of that request, etc. So I go there one year. This is the early '90s. So I go drive, an hour and a half across Chicagoland and go to the hotel and go get on the elevator. And there's Joe Theismann, an NFL National Football League quarterback, had just maybe 5 years earlier been to 2 Super Bowls, won one of them, and there he was. And he's kind of a huge guy. But anyway, so I was quiet and just got on the elevator and we went up to the floor where this management meeting, and he was a motivational speaker for them, and they loved him so much they brought him back the next year. Well, the next year, my clients asked me to come back and meet again with their clients. And so I enter the hotel, get in the elevator bank, and there's Joe Theismann again. And I said to him, we're going to have to stop meeting like this. And he didn't, he gave me a quizzical look or whatever, and I said, last year you spoke to the same group here, and I got on the elevator and you were there, and we rode up to the whatever floor it was, and so here we are doing this again. And he kind of chuckled, and we got off the elevator and all that. But I really didn't have any kind of extended conversation with him, but that was as close as I got to somebody who in the United States was pretty familiar, at least to the male-dominated clients that I worked with.
Big people, aren't they? Like when you get like NFL, or they're just wow, doesn't yeah, exactly. Yeah, I got in a lift once with Hulk Hogan at the W in New York, and he was massive. I mean, he looked he had dark glasses on. He didn't talk or anything, but. Very
the mustache imposing. Would have given him away.
Yeah, exactly. And the bandana, but just imposing, just anyway. Hey, so what is something that not many people know about you?
So back in 8th grade, I was a child model. And my stepmother had gotten me into this. I have a half brother who was a child model, and when he was 5 years old, 6 years old, and I'm 12, 13 years old, and she convinced me to go do this. So we go into Chicago to Old Town, where all the hip and happening things were, the beatniks before the hippies, and that's where all the photographers were in the photography studios. And so we'd go down there and I get to experience some of that. But I had one job that was really successful, and I was in the 1965 J.C. Penney's Christmas catalog, and I was James Bond. And I was in a tuxedo with a boutonniere, and I was carrying the attaché case, and I had one of the James Bond guns in my hand, and, it was for the James Bond 007 attaché case, $8.88 back in the day. And, but anyway, so that was but then I didn't like doing it, and so I convinced my stepmother to, not take me on all these photo shoots and all these cattle calls and things like that. So
that's pretty cool, though.
Very few people know about that.
What, J.C. Penney at Christmas? I mean, and I have to say, there is a bit of a Sean Connery about you. Just a little bit. Yeah. Was it based on a Sean Connery? Was that Sean Connery era?
Yeah. Yes, it was, because it was 65. So I think did they first come out in the early 60s? So this was just a couple of years later. Yeah.
Nice. Wow, that is very cool. Okay, look, last question, formal question is, what's your best advice for others?
So I think it's important to establish your professional network, and network with your network's network. But just like your mother warned you, to be careful about who your friends are, you need to be careful about who is in your network, because there are people who either knowingly or unknowingly promote myths such as learning styles or generational differences and things like that. And so it's important really to, build your network, scrutinize your network to see who's got valid concepts and methods and tools and techniques, has been there and done that, and then learn from them. And so part 2 of that is that, and I tell groups, I've been doing this my entire career. Adopt what you can and adapt the rest. And lately I've been saying, and there's times when you need to reject things because it's not appropriate for you and your context, or you've already got one, thank you very much, and so you don't need anything new. But when you're when you go to conferences and you read articles or see videos and all that stuff, there are things that you might be able to adopt as is and retrofit that into your practices. And there's other times when you have to take something and you have to adapt it, the language, the imagery, or whatever, to make it fit your set of practices and processes. And that's, again, that kind of goes to the name proliferation of why so many things are called different things here. But I would always speak to the language of my clients, and if they called their product development process ADDI, then I would call it ADDI. But if they called it something else, and if they had different phases or stages or whatever they use, I would change everything to fit what they were using so that it would become more familiar to them. And they would understand, oh, you call it analysis, we call it customer requirements. Yeah, we're trying to pin those things down. Yeah, same thing. But, I can call it customer requirement. And I've had clients who've said, no, call it analysis. That's good, because that's what customer requirements people are trying to do. They're trying to figure out what are the customer requirements so we can build a prototype and price it and blah, blah, blah. And so to see the parallels between what we're doing, but always default to the language of your clients, your customers. They're not interested in learning our language, our models, our methods. They, quite frankly, don't care unless you're extremely successful and they really love what you did. Then they want to know, how is it that you made the sausage?
Yeah.
And now they want to know, because maybe they can learn from you and bring that to their world. And so don't push our language and our jargon. Use the jargon at the conferences and things like that, but in your backyard, at home, at work, use the language that is currently in vogue.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Guy. That's the end of all of the formal questions. I had one other question, given your extensive experience. So I've finished recently, about 6 months ago. It's not very recent now. Head of capability role for a multinational here, an Aussie business. Not many Aussie businesses are multinational. But anyway, and I'm just kind of a bit fed up with working in corporate. I've worked at Nestle and Kimberly-Clark and lots of big, boring, faceless global companies. And so I've taken some time out and I'm exploring a couple of different avenues. One of which is consultancy, because obviously I know what I'm talking about. Hopefully I know what I'm talking about. I've got success and I've got industry recognition, etc., etc. Do you have any advice on how you do that? Because it just seems like, and I've been doing it a while, but endless business development. Because going back to your point just then, no one really cares about L&D. They don't go, oh, come and tell us at Coke about all of the details about how you do L&D. They don't care. But they do care about performance. So yeah. Any advice on how you've been so successful as a consultant? How do you start that? How do you cultivate that?
So I wrote an article that was published in the Chicago chapter of NSPI's newsletter back in 1986 on this very topic. And because I had made the jump from corporate to consultancy, people had questions. They were always hitting me with questions. And so some of my advice is basically, I'd say, name the 3 things that you want to sell. What are they? You want to, name them. Don't tell me that you can do everything or a lot of things or have a list of 12 things, because you can't sell 12 things, but you might be able to sell 3. And then out of those 3, what's the number one thing that you would like to sell? Because there's a need and you think that would be successful, or that you're really good at it and you really love doing that. Whatever the reason is, pick just several things to focus on, because you cannot have this widespread thing where I can do everything in learning and development. Well, that's hard to sell, everything. So if you can do measurement, sell that. If you can do the analysis, sell that. If you can do the design, sell that. If you can do the development using various tools, sell that. But don't have a basket full of things. Then once you've picked those 3 things that you want to sell, do some competitive analysis. How do you stack up against the competitors? What are they doing? How are they doing it? How are they pricing that? And can you have any competitive advantage? Can you be more nimble, more quick about doing things? Can you be lower priced? What can be your competitive advantage in those three narrow things that you're going to do? And then you've got to market those things. So you've got to go to local chapter meetings and share your story and your, don't do business cards anymore, or maybe you do. But so you needed to get into the network and you want to give people, you want to arm potential proponents for what you're doing so that they'll tell their management. They may say, oh, we need that. I was just talking with Guy Wallace and, he does that. Oh, really? Who's he done it with? Well, so nowadays they can go to your website or whatever and see what kind of experience behind those three things you can do. So I think the biggest mistake is that people try to sell too many different things and the marketing message is confused. They don't understand who their competitors are because clients almost always, have a choice, an alternative between you and other sources for getting things done. So if you don't know who they are and if you don't know how they operate, this is going to require you to do some homework and to dig. And so when you're digging about these potential competitors, you might uncover an opportunity. Oh, you do that too? That's why you're asking about that? So this is, I think the last thing I would mention is that you got to figure out, this is the mistake that a lot of organizations make, I think, professional organizations. They don't know what's in front of or behind the paywall. So what are you going to give away for free? Because you got to give away things that are of value, that people can actually use, take, and adopt or adapt and use it. And they're going to remember you because you were their source for that. So you've got to know where the line is between what you're willing to give away for free and what's behind the paywall, and that's where you need to be. But because there's a lot of people who say, well, you just don't want to give anything away for free because that you're giving away your proprietary stuff, what you do, what you get paid for. Why would you want to give that away for free? But it's the marketing teasers that you need to help establish who you are and what you've done. So when I co-founded the local chapter of ISPI in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we would tell all of our speakers, besides what you want to talk about, and it's anything you want to talk about, because we know who you are, and whatever you talk about is going to be just fine. But we insist that you include one tool or technique and share with that to our audience, something that they can use probably in the next week, and give them something of value, something tangible that they can actually use and embed into their practice. And so I think that's part of that firewall thing, what you're going to give away for free versus what you're not going to give away for free. Because you can be taken advantage of, you can be milked of all of your stuff and then, tossed out. And so you've got to be careful about that because not everybody in the business community is, they're not good actors. And so you've got to be careful about that, but you've got to be willing to, and you've got to know. And I think if you can write them down, I will do this for free and that for free and this for free, but only under these situations. Maybe I will come in and do something for your staff, and that gives me that exposure. And I'll do this for free versus forcing you to pay me for doing something. And if you want something else, that I do, then here's my pricing. Although people have been very hesitant about sharing their pricing because then their competitors can see what they're and I did that for a while where I said, here's my hourly rate, here's what we generally charge for this kind of a project or that kind of project, so people would have a clue as to what we're talking about. And again, if it's kind of expensive, pricey, but it's going to lead to significant performance improvement, you can do the math, cost benefit, ROI, whatever you want to call it, and people can calculate. Yeah, I might be willing to spend $500,000 if I can get $10 million back in the next 18 months. It's a math problem. Learn how to do the math. Learn to speak the language of business. Learn how business finance. Learn how score is kept in business. Understand ROI, ROE. It's not return on expectations. Since the early 1900s, it's been return on equity. And so don't be talking to the CFO about ROE and they go, what are you talking about? Return on expectations. And they go, what? Okay, next, get the guy out of here. So we've got to understand how business in general and our business in particular, what is their language? How do they calculate cost benefits, and adapt everything that we've got to what they're already doing, because that's familiar to them. Yeah. Again, they don't have the time to figure out our thing and is it the same or different. Who's got time for that? So make it easy for people to see those things.
Beautiful. Thank you very, very much, Guy. It's been a genuine pleasure talking to you. You've got such great stories and a richness. And the thing I think I'm left with thinking is just going back to the very start where you talked about, I think I raised it, but it's off your post. The whole thing about understanding the context behind where we are as an industry and understanding the lessons that have been learned. Because if we don't understand those and we don't understand the context of why we're just on a hamster wheel. We're just going round and round and round and round and round. Crazy. So yeah, thank you. Sorry, go on.
You're most welcome.
You were going to say something?
No, you're most welcome. I mean, I'm happy to do this. This is all part of me trying to help other people climb the learning and performance curves in performance-based learning and development or instruction or training or whatever you got to call it, because that's what your context calls it. Yeah, Don't change it on them.
Yeah. Thank you to our guest and to you for listening. If you want to boost the impact of your organization's people development practices, I'd love to connect. You can find me at thomasbailey.co. Alternatively, you can look me up on LinkedIn.